A Spanish passport arrives at a Manila address with a surname that hasn't changed in 400 years. A Chinese genealogy report traces bloodlines back 12 generations. A Canadian city council meeting is conducted partially in Tagalog. These aren't isolated incidents or random coincidences. They're breadcrumbs leading to one of the most intriguing geopolitical secrets of our time. While the world focuses on traditional power struggles between nations, something far more subtle and profound is unfolding. 9 of the world's most influential countries have quietly begun a different kind of competition, and the prize isn't territory, resources, or military advantage. The prize is Filipino identity itself. Before we continue, don't forget to hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an update. With that said, let's get back to the video. What started as my curiosity about Filipino communities abroad turned into an investigation that revealed a hidden global phenomenon. Countries aren't just hosting Filipino workers or students anymore. They're claiming them as their own, and the methods they're using are both fascinating and strategic. But before we dive into this rabbit hole, let me ask you something that might sound impossible. What if the Filipino identity is so powerful that entire nations are reshaping their futures around it? The first clue came from an unexpected source. While researching migration patterns, I stumbled upon citizenship programs that seemed almost too generous, cultural festivals that felt suspiciously authentic, and political statements that hinted at something deeper than diplomatic courtesy. The more I dug, the more I realized that this wasn't a coincidence. This was orchestrated influence, and it's happening right under our noses. China holds the key to understanding this phenomenon, but not for the reasons you might expect. Everyone knows about the current political tensions and economic partnerships, but there's a story buried in history that Beijing uses as its trump card. Centuries before modern geopolitics existed, Chinese merchants weren't just trading in Philippine ports, they were building families. These weren't temporary arrangements or business transactions. They were creating bloodlines that still pulse through Filipino veins today. When Chinese officials speak about their relationship with the Philippines, they don't just mention trade agreements or strategic partnerships. They quietly reference these ancestral connections, turning economics into something more personal, more permanent. The Chinese government has invested billions in genealogical research, tracing Filipino-Chinese family trees that stretch back generations. But because blood ties create bonds that political treaties cannot break, research like this requires hours of investigation. If this deep dive into hidden global connections intrigues you, consider subscribing to support our continued exploration of these untold stories that shape our world. But China's approach looks simple compared to what the United States has accomplished. America didn't just welcome Filipinos, it absorbed them so completely that millions of Americans now consider Filipino culture as authentically American as apple pie. Walk through any major U.S. city and you'll find Filipino nurses saving lives in hospitals, Filipino families celebrating Thanksgiving with lumpia on the table, and Filipino children pledging allegiance to the American flag while speaking Tagalog at home. The genius of America's strategy lies in its subtlety. Rather than forcing assimilation, it created a space where Filipino identity could flourish while simultaneously becoming American. Military partnerships dating back to World War II created emotional bonds that transcended politics. Educational exchanges brought Filipino minds to American universities, where they didn't just learn, they contributed to American innovation. Today, when American politicians speak about diversity and strength, they point to Filipino Americans as proof that the American dream works. Spain takes a completely different approach, one that's both romantic and calculated. Spanish officials don't just acknowledge their colonial history, they embrace it as a foundation for modern relationships. The Spanish government offers pathways for Filipinos to reclaim citizenship based on ancestral connections, essentially saying, you never really left the family. Spanish cultural centers across the Philippines don't just teach language, they create emotional bridges that span centuries. When Filipinos visit Spain and discover that their surnames are carved into church walls or that their family traditions mirror Spanish customs, something profound happens. Spain isn't just offering citizenship, it's offering belonging. The strategy works because it appeals to something deeply human. the desire to understand where we come from. Japan's methodology is perhaps the most sophisticated of all. While other countries rely on historical connections, Japan is building the future. Japanese corporations don't just hire Filipino workers, they integrate them into Japanese corporate culture while allowing them to maintain their Filipino identity. The result is a hybrid workforce that bridges Eastern and Western business practices. Japanese universities offer scholarships specifically designed to bring Filipino students into Japan's innovation ecosystem. These aren't just educational opportunities, they're cultural investments. When these students return to the Philippines, they carry Japanese efficiency and attention to detail back with them. When they stay in Japan, they bring Filipino creativity and adaptability into Japanese society. The exchange creates mutual transformation that benefits both nations. The United Arab Emirates has perhaps the most visible claim on Filipino identity. Dubai's transformation from desert trading post to global metropolis happened alongside the arrival of Filipino professionals who didn't just work in the city, they helped build its character. Filipino nurses staff UAE hospitals, Filipino teachers shape young Emirati minds, and Filipino entrepreneurs create businesses that serve both communities. The UAE government doesn't just tolerate this influence, it celebrates it. Filipino festivals receive official government support, Filipino restaurants are promoted as part of Dubai's culinary scene, and Filipino cultural performances are featured at national events. The message is clear: Filipinos aren't foreign workers in the UAE, they're partners in building the nation's future. Saudi Arabia's connection operates on a different level entirely. While economics matter, the kingdom's relationship with Filipinos is deeply spiritual. The millions of Filipino Muslims who have lived and worked in Saudi Arabia created cultural bridges that extend beyond employment. Saudi religious leaders speak about Filipino Muslims not as foreign believers but as part of the global Islamic community that Saudi Arabia leads. Filipino pilgrims who journey to Mecca don't just visit Islam's holiest sites, they participate in a spiritual ecosystem that Saudi Arabia carefully cultivates. The kingdom's Vision 2030 economic transformation plan specifically includes Filipino professionals not just as workers but as contributors to Saudi cultural evolution. Canada's approach might be the most successful of all, precisely because it appears the most natural. Canadian cities don't just have Filipino communities, they have Filipino neighborhoods where Tagalog is spoken in schools, Filipino festivals are city-sponsored events, and Filipino political candidates win elections. The Canadian government doesn't just offer immigration pathways, it creates systems that allow Filipino culture to flourish while contributing to Canadian society. The result is that Filipino Canadians don't feel like immigrants, they feel like Canadians who happen to be Filipino. This distinction matters because it creates loyalty that transcends citizenship. When Canadian politicians speak about multiculturalism as a national strength, they inevitably highlight Filipino contributions as evidence that the policy works. South Korea presents perhaps the most dynamic example of cultural claiming in action. The Korean wave that swept through the Philippines wasn't accidental, it was strategic cultural diplomacy that created emotional connections between nations. Korean companies didn't just export entertainment, they created cultural bridges that make Filipinos feel connected to Korean society. At the same time, Korean society has embraced Filipino workers, students, and families in ways that create genuine integration. Korean language schools in the Philippines don't just teach vocabulary, they create pathways for Filipinos to participate in Korean society. Filipino-Korean families represent more than international marriages, they represent cultural fusion that benefits both nations. Mexico's claim on Filipino identity might be the most historically significant and least understood. The Manila-Acapulco galleon trade that connected the Philippines and Mexico for over 2 centuries created cultural DNA that still influences both societies today. Mexican villages where Filipino merchants settled still carry traces of Filipino culture in their traditions, their food, and even their physical features. Mexican historians don't just study this connection, they celebrate it as proof of Mexico's global historical significance. When Mexican cultural delegations visit the Philippines, they don't come as foreign dignitaries, they come as distant relatives reconnecting with family. These 9 countries represent more than diplomatic relationships or economic partnerships. They represent a global phenomenon where Filipino identity has become so valuable that entire nations are restructuring their cultural narratives to include it. The implications are staggering. We're witnessing the emergence of a new form of soft power where cultural influence flows not from dominant nations to smaller ones, but from a people so adaptable, so valuable, that major powers compete to claim association with them. The pattern reveals something profound about the modern world. Traditional power structures assumed that influence flowed from wealthy nations to developing ones. But the Filipino experience suggests something different. When a culture is genuinely valuable, when a people possess qualities that others admire and need, the flow of influence can reverse. Countries don't just want Filipino workers or Filipino markets, they want Filipino identity to become part of their national story. This phenomenon raises questions that extend far beyond the Philippines. If 9 major countries are quietly claiming Filipino identity as part of their own, what does this say about the nature of cultural power in the 21st century? Are we witnessing the emergence of a new form of global citizenship where identity transcends national boundaries? And most importantly, what does this mean for Filipinos themselves? The answer might lie in understanding that this global claiming of Filipino identity represents recognition of something extraordinary. Filipino adaptability, creativity, resilience, and warmth aren't just cultural traits, they're competitive advantages in an interconnected world. Countries that successfully integrate Filipino communities don't just gain workers or students, they gain cultural DNA that makes them more successful, more innovative, more human. But perhaps the most remarkable aspect of this phenomenon is that it's happening while Filipino national identity remains strong. Filipinos living in Dubai still celebrate Philippine independence. Filipino Americans still send money home to their families. Filipino Canadians still watch Filipino movies and eat Filipino food. The claim isn't creating cultural replacement, it's creating cultural expansion where Filipino identity becomes a bridge between nations rather than a barrier. The implications for the Philippines itself are profound. Rather than viewing emigration as brain drain or cultural loss, perhaps it's time to recognize it as a cultural influence that extends Philippine soft power across the globe. Every Filipino who thrives abroad while maintaining their cultural identity creates a bridge that benefits both their adopted home and their homeland. As we watch this phenomenon continue to unfold, one thing becomes clear. The quiet claiming of Filipino identity by 9 major countries isn't just about those countries recognizing Filipino values. It's about the world acknowledging that some cultures possess qualities so valuable, so necessary, that they transcend national boundaries and become part of humanity's shared heritage. In a world often divided by nationality, race, and religion, the Filipino experience suggests that cultural value can create connections that make traditional boundaries irrelevant. The story of 9 countries claiming Filipino identity isn't really about those countries at all. It's about the power of a people to influence the world not through conquest or dominance, but through the simple act of being authentically, vibrantly, undeniably Filipino wherever they go. If you enjoyed this video, smash that like button, hit subscribe, and drop your thoughts in the comments below. I'm bringing you fresh content every day that you won't want to miss. Turn on notifications to be the first to know when the next video drops.